about women. We've got lots of things, haven't we, to do, and sometimes we can get very distracted, can't we? We've got to look after our families, we've got to look after our parents sometimes, we've got to look after our children, we have to look after other people's children, we've got our jobs, we've got the house, we've got the cooking, and pressure just mounts sometimes, doesn't it? I think we all feel like that sometimes, don't we? We do. And I can remember, thinking, well, we've got to praise God in this. So where am I going? So one Christmas, I think a day when the pressure really did mount, I was working, and all the time when we were working and living in the Rock, we used to invite people for Christmas dinner. So it was nothing to feed 30-odd people, but we did it in the church centre, and we had people helping. When we went to Anfield Road, we decided we were going to be a bit selfish, and we were just going to have Christmas dinner to ourselves. That was just me, Dave, and the two boys who were quite young at the time. So that was our Christmas dinner plan, no problem. I went out to work, Christmas Eve, came home, finished work a little bit earlier because it was Christmas Eve, got home just after 4, was met at the door by Dave. And he said that God had been speaking to him and he really felt we should invite other people for Christmas dinner. Okay. Well, like who? And I thought, well, maybe 2 people? No. He said, well, altogether, 8 different people had come into the house that day, and he'd invited them all. So that was now our 4 to another 8, that made 12. Now, okay, part of me was all right with that, but the other part of me wasn't. Now, he was great. He'd obeyed God, he'd done everything, he'd invited his people. He was fine with it. I panicked. I had got 1 little chicken and a pack of sausages. I must admit, the words I said to him probably weren't that kind. But how do you think I'm going to feed? He says, you'll do it. I know you will. I says, well, I can't. We physically can't do it. I can't go to the shops. They're closed now because this is going back a bit, and the shops closed early on Christmas Day. There was no way I could do it. I did have plenty of vegetables in. So I thought about it and I thought, I could make a sort of casserole. I could chop the chicken up, chop the sausage up, maybe throw a can of beans in, a few carrots. But I thought, but these people are coming for Christmas dinner, not a sort of watered down stew, which is what it was going to end up being. So what can I do? And I prayed, and God gave me these two verses.
Amen.
And I thought, okay, God, you can do this. And I must admit, at the time I thought, right, you're going to have to make this chicken go a long way when I start cutting it, and I'm going to roast it. Anyway, once I decided that, about half an hour later, there was a knock on the door. It's been about 5 o'clock now. And somebody from Chester of all places, who we did know, we did know him from another church, but we weren't close to him, and he didn't really know what was going on particularly.
Wow.
And he said, for some reason, and I can't remember the reason, he'd ended up with 2 turkeys. And he said God had said to him he had to bring one to us now. And he did. And there was a massive turkey. We had loads, we were able to give all the others. And so, you see, this has been obedience to God, isn't it? Had we not been obedient, we wouldn't have been blessed. If we hadn't invited those 8 people, we wouldn't have been blessed. And I wouldn't have had this story to tell you either, would I? So, there we are. So it is about obedience.
Yes.
Okay. And trust as well. I probably should have put trust on there, but obedience. Now stories, there's 2 different stories in 2 different books of Kings, one from Elijah and one about Elisha. But they were both single parents. They were both in need. They both loved their children. The reading in the 2nd book of Kings is about a lady who was obviously from a godly family. It says her husband followed God, and he was one of the procession people that would have come in leading the priests and in the temple beforehand. So we know he was a godly man. We don't know why he died, but we know he did. And we also know he left a lot of debt. We don't know why, and we don't know how. But the thing is, her creditors were then after her. She had no means of paying this money. So, worst thing ever, they wanted to take her sons. Can you imagine that? Mums, dads, even family. In those days, what were they taking those sons into? Undoubtedly a form of slavery. But can you imagine the horror of that? Having to give your kids up because you can't pay your debts. And that's what this poor woman was going through. And not only that, if they took her sons, that left her destitute. Because in those days, as your sons grew up, they were your providers. There wasn't social security and pensions. Your sons provided for you. So she had nothing. She had no future. She was desperate. So when she saw Elisha, she was really desperate and ready to do everything. And she saw him and she recognized him as a man of God. And so she was willing to do whatever he asked her. Her obedience, a little bit like mine, was out of desperation. She wanted to do what Elisha said. So when she went to him and told him the situation, he says to her, okay, just obey me, do what God says, do what I say. Go and collect all the containers you can from your neighbours, and then go home and fill those jars with oil. And it'll carry on doing, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Can you imagine how she felt? Well, I'm not sure. I think I may have thought, well, okay, I'll go around the neighbours, that's not too difficult. May have to sort of think of something, reason why I'm going to collect the oils. Can't tell them I've got a little bit of oil and I'm going to fill them all up with, because they'll think I'm totally gone. So I'll just, but I will do that. In fact, she sent her sons out, if you look. So her sons went round the neighbours and picked up the containers. So then she goes home, closes the door as Elijah says, gets this little jar of oil, and okay, God, starts pouring. Whoa, that's full. And then she poured a bit more. And as she did more, she was becoming more and more obedient to God, and her faith was increasing. Because as she saw those jars filled up, she expected more. So even at the end, when she'd run out of jars, she was like, quick, get me some more, get me some more.
Amen.
But of course, there wasn't any more. So that was it, our obedience. We need to be obedient and trust God. Sometimes, you know, we do things out of desperation because we've tried to do things our way. I'm sure this lady had tried to get the money herself. I'm absolutely sure she had. Who wouldn't? But it had failed. I don't know what God had told her to do. But we sometimes try to do things our way, and we've not listened to God. Maybe we didn't like what God was saying to us. He might want us to move. No, I don't want to move, Lord. Why should I do that? Why should I change job? I'm comfortable where I am. You know, we have all these things. I want to go out with that guy. Yeah, I know he's not a Christian. I know all that, but it doesn't matter, God. I want this. And God say, no, no, no. And, you know, sometimes we behave in a certain way. Well, it's all right for me to go to that nightclub, or it's all right for me to do whatever. You know, God will forgive me, and it's okay. And I can witness to people. God's saying, no, he speaks to you all. He knows what you're to do. So do it. And what about the forgiveness one? You know, God's asked me to forgive someone. Well, I might do eventually. But you know, God's saying, no, if I've told you to do something, you do it now. You know, we end up in trouble if we don't do what God does. And we end up taking God second best for our lives. God does forgive us, sure. But sometimes if we don't follow his plan and do what he asks, we end up with second best. And that's not good. Jonah is a classic story of that, isn't it? Just to bring that into context. Here's Jonah, big guy, prophet. God's saying to him, go to Nineveh, Jonah. Don't want to go to Nineveh. Go. No, I'm not going. Not going. They won't listen to me. I'm not going. So he decides, I'm going to run away. I'm not even just not going to listen to God. I'm going in completely the opposite direction because I'm not doing this. So off he goes, gets on the ship. What happens? Storm, bad weather, and everybody, we know the story. End up having to throw him overboard. Storm stops. Big fish comes, swallows him. And there's Jonah in the belly of this fish now. 3 days he's there. I'm sure I can think of some of the prayers that he said then. I'm sorry, Lord. Get me out of this mess. I will do what you ask me to. Just give me one more chance. I'm sure we've all been there. Not physically in a fish's belly, but we've been there, haven't we? We have. And this is what, and God gave it to him, and he made the fish, vomit him up on the beach, and then he went off and did. Okay, I know when he went to Nineveh, he messed up again, but there we go. That's another story. But in the end, it's best to do what God asks, and if we can do it straight away, it does make our life a lot easier, really, doesn't it? Although we do fight sometimes. So no matter what the reason, obedience teaches us trust. It increases our faith in God. And one of the things that I wish I'd done when I was younger
Somebody told me, when something speaks to you, and you've experienced God work in your life, write it down and keep a record of it. And he says, so that when the times of doubt come, or the times when things aren't going good, you can turn to that book and read all the times God's been faithful and what he's done. I never did it, and it's something now I wish I had and I regret. So any of you younger people, I would recommend that, I really would. So, how do we obey God? All right. The first thing is, she listens. The woman listened. This is the woman in the second reading to Elijah. We know, well, they both listened, but the one with Elijah, she definitely listened. She listened to God directly, and she listened to God through Elijah. We know she listened to God because he says, I have sent a woman, I've spoken to a woman, I've commanded her to feed you. So we know that she had listened to God. So it's not just enough to listen to God, is it? We need to, when we hear God, he often requires action. How many of you, this is a very mum thing, and I'm sure we've all done it, and we've all had it said to us. Do you hear me? Are you listening to me? What did I say to you? Did you hear what I just said? All this, I'm sure you've all heard or said yourself. And I think God says that to us sometimes too. I think he says, did you not hear what I said to you? And when he's saying that, he means, do it. Do it. Like my grandson the other week, we were away in Centre Parks, and he was about to pull the television out the wall, which wasn't a good idea. He's only 18 months old, but it can be a bit naughty sometimes. And I says, Kevin, don't do that. And he looked at me and he glared at me. And I says, you heard me. And he stopped. I was waiting how much the television was going to cost. But, we do this, and God does this to us. He says, you heard me. You heard me say this to you. Do it. So, God had told this lady that she was to provide Elijah with food. So we don't know how God spoke to her exactly. We just know that he did. So we don't know that God speaks to us in many ways. Sometimes I would advocate, if we need to obey God and trust him, we have to listen to him first, don't we? If we haven't heard him, how do we know what to do? So, read your Bible, talk to other Christians. Sometimes God speaks to us through songs. Sometimes it's just through reading something. Sometimes it's directly, sometimes it's in visions, but focus your life on him. Start listening to what God is saying to you, and then you can learn to obey and trust. We know that this lady didn't know Elijah, because if we turn to Luke chapter 4, Jesus actually mentions her. It says, yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to a widow of Zarephath in the region of Sidon. I know it's a different context he's talking about there. He's talking about not being a prophet in your own country. But the point is, he knew that Elijah went to somebody he didn't know. It was a stranger. So she didn't know him, but she recognized him. And and Elijah recognized her. So when Elijah called to her, because she'd heard from God, she was ready and willing to obey and recognize God's voice through Elijah. And that's what we must do, isn't it? We must recognize God's voice and be ready, willing to obey. So how do we recognize God's voice? When John 10:27, it says, my sheep recognize my voice. Now, sometimes we'll think, well, okay, that's not me. That's for the leaders. They recognize God's voice and they'll tell me. No, it's everybody. Everybody here should recognize God's voice. Don't rely on somebody else telling you. Listen to him yourself. Listen, and then Proverbs 36 says, listen to God's word in everything you do and everywhere you go. He's the one who will keep you on track. So, and that is everywhere. And that keep you on track everywhere you go. Come to church and I'll listen to God. But when I'm in work, do I listen to God? When I'm out partying with my mates or whatever, do I listen to God? Yes. Listen to God everywhere and he will keep you on track. So going back to Our Lady again, she trusted him, even though it seemed there would be less food for herself and her son. Can you imagine? The brook had dried up. So we miss that bit, don't we? We heard a bit about it going to get the water, but the brook had dried up, it tells us that. So it wasn't even an easy matter to go and get water. She didn't just go to the nearest tap or brook. She probably had to travel for that water. It may have been water that she stored in. It was a sacrifice to get that water. It wasn't easy. But she did it. And then she was going to have to use the last of her flour and give the first bit to Elijah and then bake the remains for herself and her son. So that meant that they'd have left. We knew that that was all she had. But she obeyed, she heard and she did it. So obedience and listening should be wholehearted, not selective. She could have just given Elijah the water and said, well, I've done my bit. Here's the water, given it to you. But she didn't. She did wait. She went away and she baked him the cake. And just think, if she hadn't have done that, how would she have missed out? She wouldn't have had that endless supply of flour. She probably would have gone home, baked the last of it, and her son and her probably would have died. But no, she didn't, because she obeyed, because she gave Elijah, she gave him the first fruits, she gave it to him. She was, she had plenty of money, she was able to, the flour never ran out, and she survived the famine. And so when the famine came over, she wasn't a problem. So, but we do that, don't we? I'll do this, but I won't do that. How easy it is to do that. I'll go to church on Sunday, but I'll skip the prayer meeting. God might be speaking to you in that prayer meeting, not just in church on Sunday. But, we do this. And then, what about forgiveness? I'm not going to forgive them. But God speaks to you. He does. He tells you. It's in the Lord's Prayer. Forgive others as you want to be forgiven yourself. God forgives you. You've got to forgive others. But there's so much people. I know there's a number of Christians, and I'm not looking at anybody here because I don't know, but I know a number of Christians who I've come across who say, well, yeah, but I'm not forgiving her, or I'm not forgiving him. But we do need to. We do. We really do. So we need to listen and obey. Dave may have told this story. It's a story that he's told lots of times. So if he has and you've heard it before, forgive me. But I'm going to say my understanding of it. And it's his story. It's when he was in the army and he was part of the REME, and they were stationed with the Coldstream Guards, if I've got this correct. And apparently the guards had to do silly things sometimes. They were told to do all sorts of things that seemed daft. And apparently one day they were told to go, I think it was Epsom racecourse, with nail scissors and cut the racecourse with the nail scissors. Now that sounds absolutely ridiculous. And you think, what a waste of time. What a waste of taxpayers' money paying these guys to be out there and everything. But the thing is, they were told to do this, and no matter how ridiculous it was, they had to do it. Because if they did it, they listened to their commander, he told them what to do, and they obeyed. And they learned to obey, even in the stupid sounding things. So that if they were in a battle or a crisis situation, and somebody said to them, do this, they did it without question. And that's what we need to do. We need to obey God in the little things, so that in the big things come, we do it, and we don't, we can get through. So sometimes we are asked, sometimes what we are asked to do sounds strange, but we need to learn to obey in everything, so that when a crisis comes, we don't question it, we just do it. There's many examples of obedience and listening to God in the Bible. Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego in the fiery furnace, I'll just talk about that one for a second, because I want to just bring something out of that. Is they knew, they were brought up from the commandment, you don't worship idols. They knew that. But then Nebuchadnezzar brought this big idol in of himself. I want you to worship him. They knew they wouldn't. I'm sure they prayed about that. I'm absolutely sure they did. God, if we worship, if we don't do that, we're going to be killed. What should we do? And God says, no, you don't worship. You don't worship this idol. You know the law. You know it is. Don't do it. Don't do it. So the time came, and Nebuchadnezzar came, bowed before it. No, we're not going to. So he says, well, if you don't, you're going to have to throw you in a fiery furnace. And do you know what they said? They said, okay, that's okay with us. Because they knew, and they said, because they prayed and they were obedient to God, and so that they were so sure, they said, God will protect us. But the thing is, sometimes it's that, and the key thing is, and he said, but even if he doesn't, we are going to obey him, and we're not going to bow the knee. And that's the thing that we need to hold on to, isn't it? God doesn't owe us an explanation for or reason for everything he asks. We sometimes think, well, why God, why are you doing that? We don't have to ask him. He knows, and he will tell us why we do it, and we just do it. A bit like the nail scissors and the great thing, just do it. Procrastination, that's the next thing, isn't it? When we procrastinate, understanding can wait, obedience can't. You know, often we find out sometime later why we have to do that, but we do have to obey when we are asked. Delayed obedience is actually disobedience. So we don't need to know why, we just have to do it. And there's many a story I can sort of tell you about that, and one of them, I think, it's a little bit of a sad story, was when we were in Anfield, and there was one of the guys there. It was going back years and years, and I don't remember the Crossing the Switchblade video came out, and it was a mighty testimony. And this one guy, he came from a non-Christian family, and he really, really felt that God was saying he needed to take this video home that night and show it to his family, to his dad in particular. And he geared himself up. He even went and bought sweets to take back and share with them, and off he toddled back home. The next morning he came round he borrowed the video. Next morning he came round the video. How did it go? Well, I never actually showed it because I was going to, and then something else happened. And then my brother said, well, let's watch such and such, and so we did. So we never got round to it. Following afternoon, his dad died. He had a burst duodenal ulcer. Nobody knew there was anything wrong with him. And, you know, that was procrastination. And, you know, that's what God, sometimes he tells us when he asks us to do something, no matter how much it is. If God's telling you to phone somebody, phone them. If he's saying go and visit them, visit them. Whatever God tells you to do it, and do it now. So, the ladies in question, she went and got water straight away, without question. She went and did that. She did question a little bit about the flour. That was a little bit, but she still did it. When Elijah said, no, you do it, you know, God will provide. She didn't, she went. So don't make excuses. The longer we leave something, the harder it is. We start overthinking, don't we? She could have done that. Well, what if that isn't true? What if God doesn't provide the flour? Then we're going to die. Oh, you know, we get that. Well, what if I go and see that neighbour across the road? And what if I tell them that I'm a Christian and I want to tell them about Jesus? They might reject me, they might never ask me into the house again, they might talk about me, they might tell the whole neighbourhood that I'm stupid or something. You know, we start overthinking, don't we? We do everything, you know. In work, if I do that, you know, then, oh no, that might happen, and then that might happen, and then if that happens, best not to do it. And, you know, and we overthink, so it's so much better, really. You know, do it when God tells you to do it. And particularly, I think, in relationship problems, the longer you have a problem with somebody, the harder and harder and harder it is. And it's much, much harder much harder to deal with the longer we leave it. I'll just tell you a little story about myself, just as you know. Well, I'm definitely not perfect, you all know that. But going back, just before we left America, there was this lady, and she'd done nothing wrong, it was me. But she said something today which I felt was disrespectful, and it bugged me. It really bugged me. And he would say, leave it. It doesn't matter. It's her problem, not yours. Leave it. Could I leave it? No. And it really ate me up. And I thought I'd given it to God. But when we left America, I should have gone round and said goodbye to her. But I'm busy. I'm too busy. I had excuses. Oh, I have to pack. I've got to do this. So I never went and said goodbye to her. So we moved back here. This is 6 years ago. This is procrastination par excellence. 6 years I'm talking now. And so we were back here, and I was thinking, and you know, regularly, this has come back to me. I've had my prayer time, and regularly, this has come back. And I think, oh God, you know, it's gone, it's finished with, it's over, it doesn't matter. No, you need to speak to her. You need to speak to her. And so I thought, but I haven't fallen out with her. She says, no, but you still need to speak to her. But I have forgiven her, Lord. Yes, but you need to tell her. You need to speak to her. So 6 years have gone on, and then it was Joan and Morris's wedding anniversary here the other Sunday, and God really spoke to me. He spoke to me over a few things. And a little bit of me was sad, because I thought Dave and I won't ever get to 60. In fact, we won't get to 50. But on the other hand, I suddenly just remembered we had had a brilliant 40th wedding anniversary in our church in America. They'd laid on a surprise party. They'd actually ended up having to tell me because of sorting a few things out, but they never told Dave. And he was just, you know, absolutely bowled over by it. It was really good. And you know, I suddenly thought, but you know, the person who organised that was this lady. And I thought, you know, you've got to ring her and tell her. You've got to tell her. So I messaged her, and again I was thinking, oh, 6 years, she's going to think, who does she think she is? She's going to go around the neighbourhood telling them, do you know what she's trying to do? You know how you do? And I thought, no, I'm not overthinking this. God, I've been disobedient to you for 6 years now. Time to put it right. So I did, and within minutes, bearing in mind it's a 5-hour time gap, and I hadn't really taken into consideration the time, she's back to me. Thank you so much, and a lovely message, and messaged her back, and please, if ever you come over to America again, please come and see me, I'd love to see you. So there we are, you see, it was restored. But if I should have been obedient 6 years ago, it would have made it a lot easier. So, the next point, my final point really is, don't be afraid. Both women had reason to be scared, they really did. And Elijah said to them, don't be afraid. There's many a time I've felt like that little man in that bed with Jesus. I'm like, oh, I don't want to do this. It can be scary, and I could tell you many examples, but I don't want to go on. And God honours his promises. If he asks you to do something, he'll enable you, and he'll give you what's needed to do it. He won't leave you on your own. He's right there with you. You can even feel him holding your hand sometimes. And the more you obey God, the more you learn to trust God. So, what am I trying to say? Get closer to God. Spend time listening to him. If there's anybody here that hasn't got a relationship with God, you know, don't go away today without at least asking somebody about it. Get yourself right with God, and get yourself to, and if God is saying something to you, hear him. Do what he asks about you without procrastinating. He really knows what's best. I know that there's people here today that God's asking you to do something and you're not sure about. Please do it. And yes, it can be scary, but you know, he won't let you down. Now, I was trying to think of some witty thing to finish with. I'm not very good with words. I'm not Dave. But then I suddenly realised that somebody's actually done it for me. And it's out of that, I'm just going to read the hymn, the one verse out of that hymn, Trust and Obey. I'm not sure what verse it is, but I've just written it out. It says, then in fellowship sweet, we will sit at his feet, or we'll walk by his side in the way. What he says we will do, where he sends we will go. Never fear, only trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey.